Oolong tea can work great both with hot water and cold water, but which one is better? In this video, we're going to compare the flavor and aroma of cold brewed oolong with hot brewed oolong to see which one works the best. We'll also explore how the temperature itself can influence the perception of the tea. Let's get started. Okay, so what we have here is the Miyazaki Sabo oolong. I have it prepared ahead of time as a cold brew, and I'm going to prepare a hot brew throughout the course of this video. And then I'm going to compare the two different teas and see what I notice in terms of the taste and also how the temperature affects the drinking experience of the tea. So let's go ahead and take a look at the leaves here. What you'll notice is that compared to some of the typical ball-rolled oolongs that you'll see from China, this one is a lot more loosely rolled. So this would follow more of what you might call the strip shape. So these are loosely rolled leaves, and as you can see by the cold brewing, they open up really easily and kind of release their flavor into the water in only a couple of hours actually of cold brewing. So after an hour or two, these leaves are fully opened up, whereas the ball-rolled oolong actually takes 4, 5, maybe 6 hours even to fully open up in the cold water. So I have about 5 grams of tea here, and I have my Kyushu teapot. So this is the black Tokoname Kyushu teapot from Tokoname, Japan. Tokoname is considered to be, the de facto capital of pottery in Japan. So this is where the best teapots are coming out of. It's considered to have the best quality clay as well as some of the most talented potters. And this one is handmade in Tokoname. And if you'd like to pick it up, you can find it on our website, neoteas.com. But this is what I'm going to be using to prepare the Miyazaki Sabo oolong. I'm going to be using about close to 70 degrees Celsius water and a similar leaf to water ratio compared to Japanese green teas. We're going to let this brew for 1 minute, and then we're going to pour it out and compare the flavors of these two teas. So a little bit about this tea. The Miyazaki Sabo oolong is coming from Miyazaki. It's a prefecture in Japan. So in Japan as a whole, oolong tea is actually quite rare. You're mostly going to see green teas, but there are some oolong teas and some black teas and some post-fermented teas as well that are really nice, and you can try some of those out. This one, although it's rare in Japan as a whole, there are some areas like Miyazaki that do specialize in the production of oolong tea. So you will find certain pockets of farms and farmers that are producing oolong tea, like Mr. Issen, for example, also produces an oolong tea in Miyazaki. Brewing time of 1 minute. I'm going to go ahead and pour this out. So you see the color is not too different from the cold brew. I'm just going to go ahead and get an aroma of the wet leaves. Oh, wow. Yeah, with this tea is really spectacular, the aroma coming off of the wet leaves right when you brew the tea. Definitely don't skip this phase because it's really part of the drinking experience, getting that fresh aroma from the leaves. It's really floral, a little bit milky as well. Almost like, I always compare this tea to a jin chuan or like a milk oolong. Very similar. You get kind of this coconut milk aroma, you get some of these lilac flowers, honeysuckle, things like that. So let's go ahead and taste this tea, the warm one. Yeah, I'm really getting a lot of sweetness with this one. Normally I get more of the floral notes here. I'm getting more of the sweetness, so a little bit of that honey, maybe honeysuckle, so like a sweet flower, kind of really pleasant. Let's compare it to the cold brew. Here I'm just going to be drinking the water through the leaves, not too difficult to do, but you can, if you do this at home, you should definitely use a strainer, just pour it through. Definitely more of the floral notes coming out here, but that's just from one brewing. This one, leaning a little bit more into that kind of, a little bit more into that cinnamon direction. It's kind of, this tea does have a little bit of that spice to it that I like. And typically you find this more with a roasted oolong. This is an unroasted oolong, so normally you'd expect more of these kind of fresh grass notes, more of this flowery note, but you do get a little hint of the cinnamon as well. Here the flavor is definitely smoother, definitely a little bit more nuanced. Here you're going to get more kind of strength with the flavor. So for the second brewing, I actually took the temperature of the water up a little bit to 70 degrees Celsius, because in order to get kind of a stark contrast between the cold brewed and the hot brewed tea, I realized I probably should be using slightly hotter water. Although this is what I would normally brew the tea with, is something like 65 degrees Celsius. I'm going to be using 70 just to kind of get a stark comparison between these two teas and see kind of how the warm water affects, or the hot water in this case, affects the tea versus the cold water. So for the second brewing, because the leaves are kind of more or less opened up, you only need a few seconds. We use 20 seconds. You can go 30 as well. I think I'll maybe give this a tiny bit more time just to really make sure I maximize the flavor. So you can see the color gets a little bit darker here. The aroma of the wet leaves still has that really perfumey kind of floral note. Let's see about the taste. Yeah. I'm getting a little bit more of this kind of citrus. It is leaning into that spiciness a little bit. I normally wouldn't notice the spiciness if I were just drinking this tea. But when I compare the two, I do kind of notice, yeah, there is a little bit of cinnamon spice to this tea, which normally you would get just in a roasted oolong, but here you're getting a tiny hint of it in an unroasted oolong. And this is really good that I did this experiment, because I didn't notice that tasting note before, but comparing the cold versus the hot, you really notice it. Yeah, here's much more mellow, a little bit more of kind of young spring grass, a little bit more of the lilacs, kind of these kind of aromatic flowers. Yeah, here you definitely get the flowers as well, but you also get, again, that cinnamon. You get a little bit of sweetness, a little bit of almost citrusy as well. It's kind of rounded out by a tiny bit of astringency when you do hot water. And this is because hot water is going to extract more catechins. So if you want a smoother tea, a sweeter tea, you can go for the cold brew. If you want more raw strength, you can go for the hot brew. Another interesting thing is that you actually get quite a bit of an aroma off of the cup. So normally you wouldn't get this with Japanese green tea, but with this one you get it, and also because the temperature is a little bit higher, you're getting more of the aromatic kind of steam coming off of the cup. Whereas with the cold brew, I guess that's one disadvantage. There's not really much smell to it because, you know, the cold water is not going to have that kind of aromatic effect. So one benefit to the hot brew tea. So far it's tough to give the edge to one or the other because they're better for different reasons. This is definitely smoother, a little bit sweeter, more kind of nice on a nice refreshing drink on a hot day, whereas this, it's a little bit colder right now, so I'm enjoying much more the warmer brew. But I think if you switch the season on me, I would have a different opinion. So let's go ahead and do 1/3 infusion. This tea can probably stand up to 4 or 5 infusions because it just is more complex. There's a lot of layers to the oolong. But just to keep the length of the video a little bit shorter, we'll just do 3 infusions, and I'll try to finish this one up while it's brewing. So as I was finishing that tea up and the tea was starting to cool down a little bit, I actually found the tasting note I was looking for, that kind of citrusy astringency. You know, I thought it was kind of like a lemon. I think it's more of like a green apple. So this is kind of like, you know, with the cinnamon note, this little bit of cinnamon note, and that kind of slightly sour green apple. I think that's what I'm getting here, but the two pair quite well together. Not quite, I'm not claiming that it quite tastes like an apple pie, but the ingredients are there. You know, it's got a little bit of spiciness from the cinnamon, and it's got kind of a little bit of that crisp green apple flavor that's not too offensive, but it does give a little bit of astringency to kind of make the tea a little bit crisper. Third brewing is starting to get a little bit more into the background. Here you really start to notice how the temperature of the water itself kind of affects your enjoyment of it, because this tea is just like a little bit too hot for me right now. So the first couple sips, I kind of have like a warped perception of it. And here, you're able to kind of enjoy and appreciate the tasting notes a little bit more. And then as this tea cools down, the flavors are starting to get a little bit more into focus. That's why I was able to get that tasting note while this other steeping was brewing. So the third brewing, give it a little bit more time to cool down. Yeah. I'm getting a little bit of that sour apple again. A little bit of that cinnamon, a little bit of the sour apple. More of the floral notes. I would say the floral notes are beginning to dominate once again. Less astringency than before. There's just been more extracted from this tea. I would definitely say that this tea can go for more infusions, but for right now, it does seem like the flavor's beginning to fade a little bit. So that's probably a good place to end. Overall thoughts on these two teas. I think it depends what you're in the mood for. If it's a hot day out and you're looking for something cool and refreshing, you're going to like this one, obviously. And if you want something a little more soothing, you would probably prefer this one. Other advantages and disadvantages. This one, you're going to get more aromatics just because of the kind of warm air coming off of the tea. It's going to be easier to get that aroma. The advantage of this one is you're going to be extracting less catechins, so you get less of that bitterness. Although this one, on the other hand, you're going to get more raw power because hot water is going to extract more from the leaves than cool water, all else being equal. So thank you all so much for tuning into this session. I hope you enjoyed it. This was definitely a good experience for me to compare these two teas, hot versus cold. I definitely learned more about the Miyazaki Sabo Oolong. If you want to try this oolong and maybe even try this experiment yourself, you can pick it up on our website, neoteas.com. And it would really help to support the channel if you guys could try some of the teas for yourself and let us know what you think. So thank you all so much for tuning in. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. But until then, we'll see you next time.